You said in there, after a few false starts, you thought these companies were starting to get religion in a sense. What changed?
Well, I think the extent of the Russian interference became more and more obvious. I think the threat that Congress or others may step in, and I frankly think there were an awful lot of users who are starting to lose faith in the fact that these platforms were doing any self-policing at all. The volume of bots, the volume of fake accounts, I think they realized it was in their own best interest to try to help clean this up a little bit if they're going to maintain users' confidence.
We didn't hear the words very much. Breakup, antitrust, utility-style regulation, FCC. Are those arguments fading?
I think there are some people who would still argue that. That's not where I'm going to start, and I also am a little worried if we look at these companies in isolation without looking at this as a worldwide market. I don't want to replace American innovation with Chinese tech companies who will come in with virtually no restrictions at all, and frankly sharing with the Chinese government. But I thought where I thought the markers were today was a willingness, for example, from Twitter to say, hey, yes, maybe we ought to go ahead and indicate whether you're being communicated with a human being or with a bot. I thought that Sheryl Sandberg took a pretty bold step, saying not only was she willing to make sure that users knew what Facebook data they were taking, or how Facebook was using their data, but she would also work with us to make sure users knew how they were monetizing that, so that users might actually understand the value of their data. And then I also thought Facebook acknowledging that they not only have a moral, but potentially even legal obligation to take down those sites that incent violence. We cited obviously the awful circumstance of the Rohingya in Myanmar, but obviously that would lead to a series of other discussions. So I thought the companies were leaning in.
So if this is the beginning of a long debate, those are some concrete examples of things that could happen practically and soon?
You never like to say practically and soon and put Congress in the same sentence.
Okay.
But I think there is a growing recognition that even though if these companies are going to lean in, there are a series of other platform companies that might not be as willing. You are going to need some rules of the road. I think, and again, not about cutting off innovation, but actually trying to restore users' faith.
I got to ask you about Google's absence. Why?
Great question. I've known the Google folks for a long, long time. I don't get it. Frankly, in terms of the misinformation, disinformation, YouTube has been a smaller challenge than, say, the Facebook post or the Twitter post. There are a series of other questions that have arisen, but they indicated they weren't going to come even before Mr. Trump started tweeting about them.
Why wasn't the general counsel acceptable?
We've had a chance. I know Kent Walker. I think he's a good guy. We had the general counsels last November. This was a time for the CEOs or chief operating officers to appear. And I think that you heard uniformly from senators from both parties real frustration with Google with not showing up.
People who speculate about a congressional subpoena, are they off base?
I think we've been trying to do this in a way that's collaborative. We actually wanted to, today was not a bunch of gotcha questions. It was really about how do we work towards a solution. I just think it's in Google's best interest to be at that table working towards a solution.
I guess my question is, how badly do you need to hear from them? Will you force them to come if they refuse?
We're going to keep all our tools. I would still rather start this process in a collaborative fashion. We've not heard in a formal way back from Google, other than the fact that they weren't sending one to anyone else and that they were willing to still send Kent to brief. But they need to be, I think, publicly explaining to the American public why they think they shouldn't be part of the solution, since clearly there's been challenge, and there's a host of other challenges now that maybe they didn't want to raise about they are cooperating with China in terms of building a search engine that would go ahead and accept Chinese censorship. I would think if they aren't doing that, they'd want to make the case and explain to us as policymakers.
I want to ask you about the exchange Marco Rubio had with Alex Jones, not because it's a bit of a circus on cable TV today, but because his presence, some argue, colors the debate. Just being here. What did you make of what they said to each other, and how do we talk about these things if he's going to be coming in?
Well, I didn't see the whole exchange. I was still in the committee room. But when you've got someone who is frankly as kind of out there as Mr. Jones is, who I would argue when some of his conspiracy theories are causing, for example, the parents of the Sandy Hook victims to have to change their identities, move out of their houses. I would argue that some of those arguments are the kind of inciting violence that needs to be examined. So I don't think Mr. Jones is part of a productive part of the discussion. It is part of the kind of dark underbelly of the ecosystem that's been created.
But do you see a line between, for example, Sandberg's comment on Myanmar and Jones in the U.S.?
Listen, I'm not going to jump all the way there, but I am going to jump that if there is both moral and legal obligations to take down sites that incent violence, and clearly she acknowledged such circumstances in Myanmar, was that. Now, it's all a gradation, but I think that's a healthy debate to have. I think the fact is that the town square ought to be able to have all voices, but there ought to be some counter when people are just making things up. That doesn't mean you have to necessarily remove them, but there ought to be a counterpoint.
So we got a few months left before the midterms. What are you looking for specifically from these companies between now and then?
Well, I want to continue to hear, one, that they're working with our intelligence community and with third-party operators. For example, it was, I think, a third-party validator, a third-party cyber company that found some of the things that Cheryl had taken down in terms of Facebook had taken down some of the sites. But this is going to be an ongoing iterative process. The Russians are getting better as well, and my fear is when we marry a cyber intrusion, for example, like an Equifax getting personal data, a hack, and then a foreign entity taking that hacked information with personal information, contacting Carl, and you open up, it's got personal information, and then you have a deep fake video of a business or political figure that's not that figure. You've got that marrying of misinformation and cyber that really could be the next generation. And honestly, it will probably have a first order effect more in the business world before it'll even have that kind of effect in the political world.